let's go ahead and continue with some key terms. Um, this is really important because we're going to use this forever, like ever. In your research methods class, you're going to be using these key terms. They're common, and you're going to get used to it so fast. So I guess the first key term we want to discuss is the population, right? We always need to discuss like population over a sample. So the population is a collection of persons, things, or objects or subjects of the study. A parameter is a number that gives a property of the population. So what this means is if you're given a population, and you can think of the 2020 census, right? Like the 2020 census, every single household in US has to fill it out. And that way they could appropriately give funding to schools, to streets. I mean, who cleans your streets, right? The lights, Caltrans. So it's really important we fill out the census. And that means you're going to take every single household in America. That's not a sample, that is every household. So the population is this set and it contains everything and every subject that could ever exist for that subject. So if you said cats like to sleep 18 hours a day, that means you would have to say that I surveyed or the research surveyed the population would be all cats in the entire world, all from Africa to all the way to Antarctica to Brazil, right? Every single cat. That's what you're making a generalization when you say cats like to sleep 18 hours a day. So again, we to be able to study and observe cats, especially because some are wild and some are street cats, observe every single cat in the entire world and see how long they sleep in a day is just so unreasonable and so impossible, right? So we need to somehow be able to collect a subset of the population and then use a sampling technique to survey those cats and then be able to have good enough data and understand our data to make a generalizations with cats. So the subset of the population, that's the sample. Okay, and within the population and sample, remember, is you will be given parameters, which is a number, and a statistic, which is named after the class. It goes with sample. I would say P with P and S with S. That's the best way to memorize it. Like most likely in your lifetime, you'll never survey a population unless you're very specific about your study. Like the average number of hours a student sleeps in my professor's statistics and probability class in fall of 2019 is, I mean, it has to be really specific. And then, yes, it would have been a population, right? But we just don't. And we don't really want it to be that specific. Like, we don't want to only have cats that sleep 18 hours that they are in Orange County, in Orange, in the zip code 92869, right? We want to be able to make a generalization for all cats all over the world that they sleep 18 hours. So it's really important we understand the difference between a population and then a subset of the population, which is a sample. Okay, and then the variable is really important. It is notated by a capital letter X, which we'll see a lot in this class, and it is a characteristic of interest for each subject. So what would be the characteristic of cat sleeping? That I want to make a generalizations about the number of hours cats sleep, right? The characteristic is the number of hours the cats sleep, right? How long does the cat sleep, right? Okay, so let's look at some examples of these. So determine whether the given parameter is a statistic and list the respective sample or population, then identify the variable. So let's go ahead and do that. So determine whether the given the given is a parameter or statistic. So we're just looking essentially for population or a sample, right? So suppose the percentage of all students on your campus that have a job is 84.9%. So it's saying the percentage of all students on campus. So did it was it specific to a specific course at a specific time with a specific professor? No, it just wants to take this school wants to take a generalization of how many students work, right? So this would be a population. And the population, again, would be all students at the school. At your campus. And the population means that we have a parameter, and the parameter again is a number about the population. So what was the number they gave? It was 84.9%. Okay, and then let's go ahead and list the variable we denote as x. So what was the characteristic of interest, the characteristic, the attribute that we were looking for? What were we trying to observe, right? Right, who were we looking at? So who was the students, right? At your campus. And the characteristic is, do they have a job, right? Do they work? Okay, so now the next one says, suppose a sample of 250 students is obtained, and from the sample we find 86.4% have a job. So now the key word in there, notice that they give you is sample. And what is the sample? The sample isn't like before, right? It's not all students at the campus. It's only how many? 250 students at your campus. Okay, well, if this is a sample in which is 250 students at your campus, this means we have a statistic, right? S with S, statistic. And what was the statistic? Remember, it's a number about the sample. So what was the number they gave about the sample? That 86.4%, right, have a job. And then the last thing was to define the characteristic. So the characteristic of interest is still going to be the population. It's still students at your campus. And do they work or not, right? So again, we just want to recap. So population is all of blank, all your subjects in your study, and then a sample is going to be a subset of the population. So now we have a different type of variables, right? So if the variable is the characteristic of interest, then we definitely have different types of variables. And the different types of variables that we have are going to be quality, meaning if they have an attribute. Another word for qualitative is categorical, and I do like the word categorical, and I'll use that most often because that's what it is. It's a category. Am I in the category of male or female? Am I in the category of Hispanic or non-Hispanic, right? So qualitative variables or categorical variables just mean that there's certain classifications based on attributes, right? So now, what about the parameter and the statistic, those numbers you were giving me, right? So the numbers, right, numerical measurements are called numerical variables or quantitative variables. And I like the word quantitative because it's a quantity. Numerical data is a number. So either of them work well. I do like quantitative because it goes with quantity. It's a number. The main difference between the two in math, like mathematically, I like to say, is that categorical variables essentially is non-arithmetic. You cannot conduct any sort of arithmetic operation. So if I have brown hair and you have blonde hair, can I add blonde and brown and get an average color of hair? No, it's either you're blonde or you're brown or somewhere in between, right? It's not, you can't add up hair. Zip codes, be careful with the variable of like what zip code we live in, because zip codes, because it's a number, doesn't make it numerical, right? It's a category in which we live in. Can I add up a bunch of zip codes and get the average zip code that we live in? No, that doesn't make sense. So numerical variables are the same, right? Are the opposite. It's arithmetic, meaning that it's temperature, it's time, it's distance. How many average number of miles do I run in a week? How many average number of hours do I sleep in a week? What is the average temperature in the month of July? So a lot of it is numerical, right? It's a quantity, and you can apply arithmetic operations on the data and get meaningful results. Okay, so let's go ahead and identify which type of variables are these. So here we say a researcher studied factors that affect the eating habits of adults in their mid-30s. Let's go ahead and classify each of the following variables as categorical or numerical. So here we can see that we're studying the eating habits of adults in their mid-30s. I have to say I ate pretty good in my mid-30s, just saying. So nationality, can I add up a bunch of persons but nationalities and get an average nationality? No, right? So that's a good way of identifying whether a variable is categorical or numerical. Is kind of always asking the question, can I find the average of ... Can I find the average of nationalities? Can I find the average number of children a household has? Well, yeah, because it's a number of children, and I could go ahead and find the average number of children in the household. So that would be quantitative. And what about level of education? Can I take a bunch of levels of education? Can I take my associates and my bachelor's and my master's and my PhD, add them up together and get a degree, an average degree? No, right? That would be so awesome, though. When I have University of Darlene, I will make an average degree. So this would be categorical. Okay, how about household income? Can I add up a bunch of people's incomes and get the average household income in Orange County? Yeah, we all like money. So we definitely know this is a quantity, and so it's quantitative. And if you want to put numerical, that's fine too. Zip codes we discussed already. We already said that we couldn't find an average zip code, so we know that's categorical. And how about daily intake of whole grains? So daily intake of whole grains, how do we measure that? Well, we usually measure them in grams. So can I find the average number of grams of whole grains that I eat in a day? Yeah, I can, right? Because it's a quantity, especially grams. That's definitely a quantity. So we say that is quantitative. Okay, so data are the values of the variable. So the variable here, let's say, is daily intake of whole grains. When I start assessing how many grams of whole grains I eat in a day. One day I eat 5 grams, that's my data. The other day I eat 10 grams, that's my data. So they may be numbers or they may be words. Datum is a single value. So the datum that may be words could be someone asking you what nationality you are or what level of education do you have. Yeah, levels, I should say. So if they ask like what color of hair you have, it's a categorical variable and your answer is a word, right? But if I ask you how tall you are and you say 56 inches, then that is quantitative and that data is a number. So again, the data itself can be a category or it can be a number. But how we use that for descriptive statistics, we're going to see in chapter 2. Okay, so let's go ahead and determine the scenario here. Okay, so we want to know the average mean amount of money first year college students spend at San Jacinto College on school supplies that do not include books. We randomly survey 100 first year students at the college. 3 of those students spent $150, $200, and $225 respectively. All right, so let's go ahead and assess this whole situation. Let's do population. Let's look at a subset of a sample. Let's look at some data. Let's look at some variables. Let's do it. Okay, so let's go ahead and first start with a population. What is the population of this scenario? Well, if we want to see the average number of money or the average amount of money first year college students spend at this college, we're looking at the population at first year college students. And in this study, do we care where the college students are at? Do we care if they're at UCLA or Princeton? No, we don't care about those schools, right? They specifically just want their school, which is San Jacinto College, right? So the whole population are all first year college students at this college at SJC, okay? And so the sample, they did not survey every single first year college student. That's a lot, right? What did they do? That's right, they took a sample. They took a sample of 100 first year college students at SJC, right? Okay, so what's the variable? If we had to define a variable, well, the first thing we would note is that because we're looking at the average mean amount of money, we already know that it's going to be a quantitative variable. Because we can find the average amount that students spend on books, right? So the variable itself is quantitative and it's going to be the total cost of supplies for those students, those students at SJC, the first year students, right? Okay. And then what is the data? Remember, the data that a variable gives could be a category or a number, right? In this case, because it's a quantitative variable, we're going to have numerical numbers, right, for our data. What were those numbers? How much did those students spend on their books? On their supplies. It was 150, right? 200 and 225. And so essentially when we have a study or we have an intent, this is what, as in your research methods course, you eventually will be doing that. You'll be doing a study for your thesis, and you will have to identify a population and understand what your intent is with the population, and then grab a sample, and you'll use a bunch of sampling techniques to find the best way to get your subjects, and then determine what type of data you're going to get and what your variable is. And then finally have that part of collection for your data. Okay,